Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. Riley, age 7, laying on the living room floor. Stephanie, age 10, laying on her bathroom floor. Billy, age 11, laying on his bedroom floor. Heather, age 13, laying on her kitchen floor. Vivian, age 45, laying on her bedroom floor. All of them laying in pools of their own blood, all because their father listened to a scary story. I wasn't the first detective assigned to this case. I was the third. The two prior detectives, McBride and Donna, had been put on suspension without pay for 2 weeks due to reckless behavior in the field of duty. They were good cops. There wasn't a bruise on either of their records until they got this case. Nobody knows exactly what made them do what they did, but now it was up to me not to repeat it, and to find out why Merlin Bleckner killed his whole family and then himself. The pictures of the dead kids were heinous. It was tough to tell who was who. Body parts were separated from the body. Facial features were separated from the face. It took a day to actually be able to identify the bodies. They had to fly in a grandparent from Florida. I can't imagine. Can you? Having to identify the bodies of your daughter, 4 grandchildren, and you can't even recognize their faces because they didn't have any? I had only been a detective for a couple months. That's why McBride and Donna got the assignment first. McBride was about 10 years younger than me. Donna might have been 10 years older. I had become an officer later than most. Most guys jump in straight out of high school, maybe college, but that's rare. Once I turned 30, before police work, I was a security guard for Cloud Ventures, Inc., a tech company that specialized in virtual reality. When a couple of teenagers went crazy while test driving their new VR headset, they had to lay off half the company, including me. Luckily, I was young enough to still become a cop, and I had a cousin who could steer me towards the best precinct. His answer shocked me. Move to Wyoming. Stop messing around, cousin. I gotta figure this out soon. Where should I go? Is the Bronx worse than Brooklyn? Tell me. I'm open to it. I'm not kidding. Move to Wyoming. There's a city called Rawlins. It's got a population under 10,000. They've had 2 murders in the past decade. If I didn't have 2 kids in high school and a third in middle school, I'd be there right now. My cousin was a cop in the Bronx. He had been for 15 years. He knew a lot of other police. One of the guys who kind of knew everyone. He was also a big ball buster. I just assumed that that's all this was. Although pulling the city of Rollins out of his ass for a joke seemed too sophisticated for him. Who would say Wyoming, let alone the city of Rollins? My old partner, Andre Holland, remember him? He came to Lucy's graduation? Yeah, funny guy. One day he comes into the office and tells me I'm moving to Wyoming. I had the same reaction you probably just had, which was, why Wyoming? He told me why. Said he wanted to get as far away from all the filth of New York as he could. Said he was just going to drive there and get a job. If it wasn't police, it would be something else. Basically, he couldn't wake up every morning waiting to hear about some new kid that got shot. I was stunned that this wasn't a joke. I kept waiting for a punchline that never came. He likes it, Wyoming? Likes it. Cousin, he's never been happier. I talked to him yesterday. He sounded 20 years younger. They've had 2 murders there in the past 10 years. Everyone in town knows each other. They say hello to each other in the street. It's like he stepped into some other dimension. I was now standing up and pacing around my apartment. My cramped, crappy apartment in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. I wasn't expecting this, cousin. You kind of shocked me here. Cousin, if you don't move to Wyoming, I'm going to beat you to death with a hammer. I gotta go. My wife just winked at me, and that might never happen again. Call me after you move. So, I moved to Wyoming. The drive was 30 hours. I only stopped twice. I'm still in shock that my '98 Honda Accord didn't explode getting me there. My dad was a mechanic, and he wanted to give me something. I never had a car. Most city kids didn't. Unless you get a horse, you'll probably need a car. That was his parting words. About as close to compassion as me and my father got. The call meant a lot. I know a lot of kids around my neighborhood that never even met their fathers. When I got to Rawlins, I called up Dre. He showed me the ropes. Well, rope. The town was so small, there wasn't much to see. That's why I love it, he said. Simplicity. When I first stepped into town, they had 23 cops. That's right, 23. The whole department. I wasn't used to people being friendly. Dre made the proper introductions. I met the sheriff, Kurt Brogdon. He told me that he couldn't hire anyone at the moment, but that could change in a year or two. So if I was up to it, would I be interested in helping with some manual labor around town? I was. The pay was weak, but so were the prices around town. My apartment was bigger than most houses back in Brooklyn, and it cost the same. Around 6 months into my Rawlins tenure, one of the cops had a heart attack. Cal Spacek. The town was so small that not only did I know Cal, I knew his whole family too. When someone died in Rawlins, the whole town felt it. Sheriff Brogdon called me up a couple of days later and asked if I was still interested in being a cop. I was. A lot of people might have found the day-to-day life boring. Not me. I loved it. Give me boring. It was a sentiment I shared with Dre. Dre was next in line to get sheriff if he wanted it. He wasn't the most senior one in line, but with his years in New York, all the other cops sort of looked up to him. New York City could seem like a hellscape to people from the outside looking in, even if the people living there didn't always agree with how they were perceived. I met my girl Marlene about a month after I was sworn in. She was a bartender. We got on well. The term opposites attract never really held any weight with me until I met Marlene. From the outside, we couldn't be more different. But when we were together, it all made sense. We filled in gaps for each other that our various upbringings were lacking. She wanted a big family because that's what she had. I wanted a big family because that's what I never had. Everything was peaches and cream the first couple of years. The only bad memories I had from back then are from things that happened back in New York. My dad passing away, my brother getting arrested again. I felt guilty not being around to help with that, but Dre told me, same thing that my cousin told me. Live your life. McBride and Donna handled both murder cases. The cases happened 5 years apart. 2006 and then 2011. Donna was older. He was a real cowboy. He had no desire to find out what being a real cop meant. He was happy just making local towns feel a little safer. Sometimes someone might steal something. That was about as dangerous as it got, for the most part. The only real danger to living in Rawlins was that the rest of the world was far away. This meant limited access to quality health care. You might not take care of yourself as good as you could if you had been living in a major city, but you never knew that. The constant smile of the town always made you feel healthy. The first murder in 2006 started as an argument in a bar. 3 guys. 2 guys were harassing one guy. It escalated into the parking lot. It got broken up. And then later that night, the guy who had been by himself found the address of one of the guys, went to his house, shot him 8 times in the chest. He would have killed the other guy too, but when he went to his house, he wasn't there. He was passed out in his car, drunk, by the side of a creek. There wasn't much to investigate. Locals saw the bar fight. A neighbor heard the gunshots. He was arrested within 12 hours. The second murder in 2011 was much more surprising, at least for us. A woman murdered a boyfriend. She claimed he had been physically and mentally abusive for a long time and had been threatening her that if she ever left town, nobody would find her. So she shot him while he was in the backyard smoking a cigar. Neither case needed much police work. There was no mystery to solve. They were both pretty open and shut. I was just a deputy back then. I would collect details here and there from McBride, who would paint with a broad brush, never too specific. But he fancied himself a protector of the town. He saw a future in politics and prided himself on staying clean, by the book, go to church, say please and thank you. All things that I had to teach myself. Donna didn't like to talk about it. Donna didn't like to talk about much. He had spent some time fighting overseas, and he was never really able to shed that baggage. His wife once asked him if he would like to speak with a therapist from the VA. He answered by not answering. He had his eyes on retirement ever since he joined the force. Both cops seemed pretty unaffected by the murders. It was so rare that they could compartmentalize it pretty easily. You could imagine, or maybe you shouldn't, but when a tiny town like Rawlins, Wyoming, gets word that a father killed his 3 daughters, his son, his wife, and himself, we were not ready for it. Merlin Bleckner seemed like such a nice fella. That was the common response from everyone around town. Nobody could believe it. McBride and Donna were taking statements from all the neighbors, friends, co-workers. They were all in shock. He coached Little League Baseball. He owned a paint supply stores, which meant everyone who painted or had children, which covered just about the entire spectrum of Rawlins, knew Merlin. How in the world could someone so nice do something so horrible? In a life filled with green flags, there seems to be only one red flag. 6 years ago, Rex Lemoyne. He was just 11 back then. His dad was friends with Merlin, so Merlin let him work at the paint store on weekends for a couple hours to make a couple bucks. Quit after a month. When Heather, Merlin's oldest daughter, who also worked at the store, asked little Rex why he was quitting, he told her he had seen Merlin chanting something to himself in the basement, and it really scared him. In fact, he started having nightmares. One night he had such a bad nightmare that he woke up screaming. Parents ran into the room, tried to console him. He told them about his nightmare, the one he'd been having a lot recently, ever since he saw Merlin down in that basement, alone, talking to himself. Parents were freaked out, his mom especially. She was so freaked out that she took him down to the police station and told Sheriff Brogdon exactly what happened. At first, everyone had the same thought. Had something more happened in that basement? No, Rex insisted. He didn't even know I was down there. Sheriff Brogdon tried to defuse the whole situation, explaining to Rex and his parents that just because a man is singing to himself in the basement doesn't mean we should arrest him. He ended with an attempt at humor, saying, "Have you been to my wife's church on a Sunday? You'd have to arrest all 50 of them." They didn't laugh. Nobody was laughing. Sheriff Brogdon promised to have one of his officers go speak with Merlin and report back to him. He swore to Rex that there was nothing to be scared of. Nothing at all. Dre should be the one who talks to Merlin. He knew Merlin pretty well. Their kids had played Little League together. They had become pretty good friends over the years. Merlin helped Dre paint his house. I met Merlin through Dre. I remember one night, after a couple of beers, Merlin confided to us that his dad was a real racist guy, that he had been brought up to believe that people like me and Dre were not to be trusted. I had experienced racism back in New York City. Dre had too. Much worse than me. But we were both really impressed that someone would be so open about that. Merlin actually started to tear up at one point. He felt so bad that his dad was like that. But he just felt like he had to tell us. He stopped by the paint store during the day, a weekday, when it wouldn't be busy. Merlin felt awful. He had told Dre that he had just read this book called Sleep Tight. Merlin found it in the Lost and Found at the church, a collection of short, scary stories. Merlin swore he had this book as a kid. It seemed so familiar. To make a long story short, he said there was one story that he remembered reading as a kid, and it freaked him out. So he can totally understand why it would have freaked Rex out too. He was probably the same age as Rex when he first read it. He would apologize profusely for reading it out loud and asked if he can go say sorry to Rex. Dre agreed that would be best, not just for Rex, but also for Rex's mom. Dre was telling me all this over a couple beers at Sundown. Sundown Saloon was the bar that Marlene worked at, that most of the cops would hang out at. I was glad to hear everything with Rex and Merlin was not a big deal. And then when I asked him about the scary story, what is it? Did you Merlin tell him? Dre took a really long pause, which was not something Dre ever did. He loved conversation. He knew it made people feel comfortable. So if you asked him a question and he didn't answer, it told you that the answer might make you uncomfortable. Hey, Marlene, can I settle up, sweetheart? Dre took out his wallet as Marlene went over with the bill. Come on, Dre, you can't leave me hanging. What was the story? What spooked him? I'll tell you tomorrow, he said. He got up, patted me on the shoulder, and then walked out. 2 days later, Dre was dead. His car had slid on a patch of black ice and then skidded off the bridge into a creek. He died on impact. I remember calling my cousin and having to tell him the news. My cousin said that Dre seemed like the kind of guy that would live to be 100. I said the same thing. Some people always feel young. Dre was one of those guys. I never got to find out what that story was about. That one that made Merlin kill his whole family. Until the day that Merlin read it to me. 6 days after he died. The devil was living among us. That's how the Sunday sermon began. Father Lacey spoke at length about how the devil can come in all shapes and sizes, where you may least expect it, but we use the power of God to resist his temptations. I had never been a religious person. Still not, to this day. But I did find comfort when Marlene squeezed my hand that Sunday sitting in church. The first 48 hours after the Merlin Massacre, as it was being called in the local papers, and eventually the local news, and to our surprise the national news, was chaos. My cousin called me. High school friends called me. They all wanted to know the inside scoop on this story, which had gained national notoriety because apparently Merlin had become obsessed with some podcast. And that podcast was now blowing up in popularity because Merlin attributed the desire to kill from one of the podcast episodes. The episode that had now become a national story and sparked a debate about what constitutes acceptable content for people to listen to. We have to listen to it, Marlene said, don't we? I told her I didn't think I could. I knew Merlin. Not that well, but I knew him. I had met his kids. Maybe down the road I would feel different, but today I wanted to avoid it. She was getting ready to close up the bar when McBride and Donna walked in. They looked exhausted. Donna usually looked exhausted, but McBride never did. He was always full of energy. He was the guy who would try to make you run with him at 5 in the morning. Nature's caffeine, my friend. It worked once. He suckered me into a 5 o'clock run. I nearly puked. That was the end of our morning run routine. I said hello and waved at him and when they walked in, but neither one acknowledged me. They didn't acknowledge anything. They just sat down. Marlene said they could get one drink, but after that she had to close. He still didn't say anything. Marlene knew what they wanted, so she set down one beer in front of both of them and then continued to clean up. I walked over towards them to see what was going on. They stayed quiet. They didn't even touch their beers. They just stared at the display bottles across the bar. After about 10 minutes, Marlene said she had to close. They both dropped the $10 bill on the counter and walked outside. While McBride and Donna kept plugging away at the Merlin case, all the other officers had to spend extra hours making people feel comfortable. The city was so on edge that it was on us to remind people that this was an extreme anomaly. There's a reason that had never happened here before. Because things like that don't happen here. They happen in other places. Places like New York. I heard that multiple times. The irony was not lost on me. The next day I did my usual rounds. Around 6 p.m. I headed back to the station. I had to file a report on a possible car theft from Gary's Auto Works. As soon as I walked in, I could see that Sheriff Brogdon was not well. He was on the phone in disbelief. I sat down, started typing. In about 2 minutes, Sheriff Brogdon was standing right behind me. "We need to go for a ride." You could see the fire from a mile away. I was driving along the nicest stretch of town, where Merlin lived. Neighbors were all outside of their houses, pointing and talking. When we got there, McBride and Donna were standing outside of Merlin's house, watching it burn. Sheriff Brogdon was in disbelief. He got out of my squad car, walked in between McBride and Donnie, and asked, "Who did this?" McBride and Donna both turned to him and said, "We did." I drove everyone back to the station. Their demeanor was still the same as it was the night before at Marlene's bar. Completely adrift, soulless. Sheriff Brogdon turned to look into the back seat and asked them why. McBride spoke first. "We had to, Sheriff." Then Donna spoke up. "To stop it from spreading. Suspension without pay for 2 weeks. I don't know what the correct punishment should have been. Maybe they got off easy. Maybe Sheriff was feeling compassionate because of what they had seen. The bodies of those little girls. Maybe he just didn't want to push them further into the dark place he knew they were already in. Whatever the reason, McBride and Donna didn't argue. They just stood up, put their guns and badges on the desk, and walked out. Sheriff Brogdon turned to me. "You're up, kid." "My first murder case." What a way to break your cherry. The motive had been established. The killer was dead. What to do now? Find out why the story had turned a decent man into a homicidal maniac. The connection to this popular podcaster was rapidly turning our local nightmare into a national obsession. Reporters from out of state were parachuting into town like locusts, trying to exploit people's obsession with murder to spike their ratings. They were talking to any citizen of Rawlins they could find. They even talked to Marlene. She told them we were still in shock. "Don't shut down a great podcast because one crazy redneck went crazy." That was the prevailing thought coming in from the east and the west coast. Us simpletons in Wyoming couldn't handle a scary story. The only thing that made me grateful for having to work this case was because it gave me an excuse to avoid watching all the nauseating news coverage. It was horrific enough without getting the opinions of anonymous trolls. I went to Rex. He was now 17, working with his dad's hardware store. I wanted to know what he had heard that day, 6 years ago, that made him quit his first job. He was in the back slapping price tags on. I told his dad I needed to talk with him for a minute. I think Rex knew why I was there. We went into the parking lot and I asked him to walk me through that moment. What had he heard Merlin talking about? I told him to give me as many details as possible. All of it was relevant. Maybe it could help people stay safe in the future. He lit a cigarette. He seemed anxious. His hand shook when he flicked the lighter. That wasn't the first time I saw Merlin acting weird. Why didn't you tell the cops that, Rex? 6 years ago. I was scared, young. He was a nice guy. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. When you say acting weird, what do you mean? Talking funny. It was almost like he was talking backwards. I never heard something like that. It was quick. Real quick, too. He was reading from that story out of the book. That's part of what made it so scary. He wasn't reading. He was just saying it. Like he had memorized it or something. And his body didn't move when he did. He was so Still, the actual story. Do you remember anything about it? No. He was speaking so weird. I couldn't understand the words, but it was the sound it made. Something about the sound of it all. It was giving me nightmares. I would wake up screaming. It just felt so real. You ever have a nightmare feel real before when you woke up thinking, my family's dead? I'm so sorry you had to deal with that, Rex. You know what's real crazy? I had that nightmare again. First time I had it in years. Rex had already finished smoking his cigarette and was now fumbling to get another. When did you have that nightmare? Rex's hand was still visibly shaking. He couldn't look at me when he said it. Same night Merlin killed his family. Mr. Linsky was wearing headphones. Mr. Linsky never wore headphones. He was approaching 80 and was about as far from technologically savvy as anyone you could ever meet. It's one of the main reasons he was such a good librarian. He loved books and hated phones. Said it was evil on more than one occasion. Yet, here he was, wearing headphones, staring at a phone. Oh, I am sorry, son. I didn't even see you standing there. How can I help you? Hi, Mr. Linsky. I'm curious if you have a book called... He cut me off. He knew the story before I could even get the first letter. Sleep Tight? It wasn't just that he knew the title. It was the way the timbre in his voice changed. The drop in warmth. Do you have it? I'm afraid not, son. We only had that one copy, and that was taken out by Merlin Bleckner. That's right, son. People have been coming by once an hour asking if we got that book, but my granddaughter told me this morning that you can listen to the whole thing. She even lent me her phone so I could listen to it while she was in school. Ain't that something? Are you listening to it right now, Mr. Linsky? Why, yes, I am, son. For the third time, matter of fact. I'm not normally a horror fan. In fact, I can't stand the genre, but this story, my lord, it really sinks its teeth into you. He kept staring at me, so still. And then he asked me, have you heard the story yet, son? I called any bookstore within a 2-hour radius. None of them had it. In fact, most of the stores knew that I was calling about it. One of them actually answered my call by saying, no, we are all out of Sleep Tight. May I help you? It might be a leap to classify myself as an old soul, even though it's a tag I've gotten used to since I was a little kid, but if you're presenting the case as to what made me an old soul, your opening argument would probably be, Your Honor, he has a flip phone. Marlene made fun of me all the time. She loved to call me an old man. She called me a cradle rocker, even though she was older than me by 2 years. Around 2 p.m. that day, I got a call from an officer in Atlanta, Officer Gibson. He was investigating this podcast author, trying to ascertain if there was any other connection between this guy and Merlin Bleckner. The officer told me there were 666 emails sent from Merlin's computer to this guy, this Theodore Fisher. He wanted to know if I had found anything in Merlin's house, anything that could point to a deeper relationship between these two guys. I told him that the house had been burned down. By who? I don't know why I lied. Maybe I didn't want my friends to get in trouble. Maybe I didn't want to cause more of a panic. Maybe I just didn't like the idea of some big city cops thinking that us small city cops are a bunch of dumb rednecks. Either way, I told them. I'm still looking into that. I got to the station late. It had to be close to midnight. I was now pulling 16-hour days. It hadn't even been in a week since Merlin killed his family, and already there was rumors that this was going to be turned into a horror movie. I figured I could head into the station and start working on my report. I got more done when it was quiet at the station. Today, it wasn't quiet. It was empty. Except for Sheriff Brogdon. He was in his office, wearing headphones, staring at his phone. I walked into his office, knowing full well what he was doing. I put my hand up before leaning into the doorway, trying not to startle him. "Hey, Sheriff." No response. I had to take a couple more steps inside to get his attention. I tried again. "Sheriff?" He looked up at me. He had this warm, knowing smile. I knew what he was going to ask before he said it. "Have you heard the story yet, Detective?" Bleckner's was blocked off. It was covered in spray paint. The front glass had been smashed with bowling balls. It had been looted, torn apart. The whole inside of his paint supply store looked like someone had dropped a bomb inside of it. There were people pacing back and forth along the corner, handing out religious pamphlets. A couple children were selling red lemonade. The news team from Lamia was reporting right out in front of the store. It had become the most high-traffic street in town. It was just a matter of time until someone lit the store on fire. That's why we had to have 2 deputies taking shifts at standing guard, just to make sure all remaining evidence of Merlin's existence wasn't vanquished. The deputy was wearing headphones. "Sanchez." He didn't hear me. "Sanchez." He heard me. Turned, slowly, just his face. "Sir?" "Take off the headphones." He stared at me. He seemed lifeless. "Have you heard the story yet, sir? The one about the man who finally wakes up?" I tore the headphones right off him and then snapped them in half. Sanchez just kept staring at me with that faded smile. He was there, in front of me, but it felt like a hologram or a cardboard cutout. It was the same smile that Mrs. Linsky had, and Sheriff Brogdon, and even Marlene. My phone rang. It was Dre's wife. I hadn't seen her in months, maybe a year. She had become somewhat of a shut-in ever since Dre passed away. "Melanie, what a nice surprise. How are you?" "May we speak?" she asked. "Yeah, everything all right?" "I would prefer to tell you in person. Can we meet by the creek?" I checked my watch. "Of course. How about an hour?" "I'll see you then." She hung up. I didn't even know what I was chasing at this point. I felt like I was trying to find a ghost. This story had taken over our town. It was all anyone could think about. I had to swing by the auto body shop. Apparently someone had stolen another car and the assigned deputy was nowhere to be found. I tried calling his cell phone and there was no answer. Eventually I had to call his wife. She told me that he was just sitting in the yard, listening to some book. Car lot was empty. The only one moving was the owner's wife, Shelley, who also worked sales for her husband. She was chain-smoking cigarettes as soon as I pulled in. "Hey, Shell. I'm so sorry about the delay. It's been kind of crazy since the Merlin, Anyway, what kind of car was stolen?" "I don't care about the cars. It's my husband." "Your husband?" "He's home, listening to that story. You know the story. The one that Merlin was reading. First it was just him, then it was Bill, our sales director, and now it's Bruce, our accountant. All they've been doing the past couple of days is listen to that goddamn story over and over and over again." "Can you speak to him?" "Who, your husband?" "All of them." "I'm sorry, I didn't know who else to call. I'm getting so scared, officer. I'm scared. My kids are scared. We're all just scared. Can you help us?" Melanie had always been very spiritual. It didn't surprise or concern me that she would occasionally be sitting by the creek where her husband passed away. She was hoping to feel a little connection with him. Maybe one day, if the sun struck in just the right spot, she'd be able to feel him again. It hasn't happened yet, but that don't mean it won't. I sat nearby, grateful to be away from people on their phones. "Melanie? What's wrong?" "Do you know the name Lamia?" "Nah." Who's that? Originally a queen of Libya, Lamia became associated with a child-devouring monster in later Greek mythology. She could be seen as a figure whose story might inspire cautionary tales or dark fantasies among writers. Do you think she's connected to all this? I believe that tales of evil have been passed down since the dawn of civilization. One generation to the next, we create these demons to try to make people appreciate the good in each other, because we can't see the light without dark. Melanie began to take something out of her pocket. The story that Dre told you about his meeting with Merlin, that was a lie. When he spoke with him, he found him in his basement. He was speaking in a language that Dre couldn't understand. A cassette tape. She held it out towards me. So he recorded it. When I came home that night, I found Dre in the basement listening to it. 2 days later, I chose to think that maybe he knew he had been corrupted. Maybe there was no pulling him out of the darkness. Maybe that car crash wasn't an accident. I have thought of destroying this tape more times than you can count. There was always a part of me that wondered if it was the key to something, some path to salvation. Will you listen to the story? So help me God. Those are the final words of an officer's oath when they are sworn in. So I was left to figure this out by myself. How could I solve this epidemic that was ravaging my home if I didn't understand what it was? I had to know. For the people that had been lost in the past. For the people that could be lost in the future. I had to know what kind of evil I was fighting against. I had to know that I was strong enough not to let it consume me. So I went in my backyard. I held the tape of Merlin Bleckner, and I lit it on fire. If God couldn't help, I was going to have to do this all on my own.